They called her worthless, a broken omega with a scarred voice and no purpose in the pack. Tonight, before the most powerful alpha king in history, her former mate demanded she sing, expecting her to fail, to crumble, to disappear. But when Leora Hale opened her mouth in that frozen hall, she didn't just sing. She awakened a king, and in one haunting melody, she shattered every belief the pack ever held about strength, worth, and destiny. This is her story, a tale of rejection, survival, and the song that changed everything. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's begin. The wind howled through the cracks in the timber walls like a starving animal. Leora Hale pressed her shoulder against the door, forcing it shut against the blizzard that clawed at the edges of her world. Snow dusted through the gaps, collecting in small drifts along the floor of the hut, a structure so dilapidated that calling it shelter felt generous. She turned, her breath visible in the frigid air, and surveyed the single room that had been her prison and sanctuary for the past 3 years. A cot with threadbare blankets, a stone hearth with barely enough kindling to last the night, a wooden table missing one leg, propped against the wall at an angle. This was what remained of Leora Hale's life in the Frostpine territory. Outside, beyond the frozen pines and the ridge of black stone that marked the pack's southern border, the rest of the wolves lived in warmth. They gathered in the great lodge, their fires roaring, their bellies full, their voices raised in laughter and song. They did not think of her. They had not thought of her in a very long time. Leora knelt before the hearth and coaxed a reluctant flame from the damp wood. The firelight painted shadows across her face, sharp cheekbones, pale skin stretched thin over delicate bones, and eyes the color of winter twilight. She had been beautiful once, or so they told her, back when beauty mattered, back when she'd been something other than a mistake. The fever had come in her 16th winter. It swept through the territory like a plague, claiming the old and the weak. Leora had survived, but the sickness had carved something vital out of her throat. When she woke, her voice was gone. Not entirely, but enough. The soothing omega purr that could calm aggressive wolves, ease tension, and bind a pack together had been reduced to a hoarse rasp, inconsistent and weak. For an omega, it was a death sentence of a different kind. Useless, Darian Voss had said, standing before the pack council with his arms crossed and his jaw set. She can't fulfill her purpose. The bond is void. Leora remembered the cold stone floor beneath her knees as she'd knelt before him, remembered the way the other wolves had watched with a mixture of pity and relief. Relief, because it meant they wouldn't have to care for a broken thing. Pity, because even they understood what came next. Darian had been her mate, chosen by fate, or so the elders claimed, their bond recognized by the pack when they were barely old enough to understand what it meant. He was a warrior, broad-shouldered and ambitious, with a wolf as black as midnight and eyes that burned with the need to prove himself. She had loved him once, in the way young hearts love, desperately, completely, without reservation. But love was a luxury the strong could afford, and Leora was no longer strong. "You're free," Darian had told her, his voice flat, emotionless. "And so am I." The severance had been swift. No ceremony, no ritual, just a public declaration and the cold turning of backs. Within a week, Leora had been moved to the hut on the edge of the territory, given enough supplies to survive the winter, and forgotten. That had been 3 years ago. She had learned to survive, learned to trap small game in the forest, to mend her clothes with trembling fingers, to stretch a single sack of grain across weeks. She had learned to be alone, to fill the silence with the memory of songs she could no longer sing properly, to wake each morning and find a reason to continue. But survival was not the same as living. The fire crackled and Leora pulled her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders. Tomorrow was the midwinter feast, the night when the entire pack gathered to celebrate the longest night of the year. It was a night of abundance, of unity, of reaffirming bonds and honoring strength. She would not be welcome. She never was. Leora lay down on the cot and closed her eyes, willing herself toward sleep. But sleep was a fickle companion in the cold, and tonight it refused to come. Instead, her mind drifted to the past, to the songs her grandfather used to sing when she was small. He had been the pack's lore keeper, an elder with a voice like ancient thunder, and a memory that stretched back generations. He taught her the old songs, the ones that predated the territory, the ones sung by wolves who'd roamed the world before borders and packs and hierarchies. Music is older than words, little one, he'd told her, his gnarled fingers stroking her hair. It's the language of the soul. Never forget that. But the pack had forgotten. They sang only battle hymns now, songs of conquest and dominance, loud and aggressive and empty of anything deeper. The soul songs had faded into myth, dismissed as relics of a weaker time. Leora's eyes opened, staring at the dark ceiling. She whispered a few notes of one of those old songs, her damaged voice cracking on the melody. It hurt to sing now, not physically, but in a deeper way, a reminder of everything she'd lost. She let the song die and turned onto her side, pulling the blanket over her head. Tomorrow would be like every other midwinter feast. She would stay in her hut. The pack would forget she existed, and life would continue, cold and small and solitary. Or so she thought. Wait, the knock came at dawn. Leora woke to the sound of fists pounding against her door, hard enough to rattle the frame. She sat up, disoriented, her heart hammering in her chest. No one came to the hut. No one ever came. "Open up," a voice barked. She recognized it immediately. Garrick, one of Darian's packmates, a blunt, aggressive wolf with little patience and even less kindness. Leora stumbled to the door and pulled it open a crack, squinting against the morning light. Garrick stood on the threshold, his breath steaming in the cold air. Behind him, two other wolves waited, their expressions carefully blank. "You're summoned," Garrick said without preamble. Leora blinked. "What?" "The Alpha King is here. Every wolf in the territory is required to attend the feast tonight. That includes you." Her stomach dropped. "The Alpha King?" Garrick's lip curled. "Valor Draven himself. Arrived last night with his guard. He's inspecting the northern territories, and our Alpha wants every wolf present to show our strength." His eyes raked over her with barely concealed disgust. "Even the broken ones." Leora's hands tightened on the edge of the door. You'll be there," Garrick interrupted. "Sunset. The Great Hall. Don't embarrass the pack more than you already do." He turned and walked away, the other wolves following without a backward glance. Leora stood in the doorway, the cold wind biting at her skin, her mind reeling. Valor Draven, the Alpha King. Every wolf knew the name. Valor Draven was a legend, a warrior who had unified the fractured northern packs through sheer force of will and unmatched strength. He was feared, respected, and utterly untouchable. Rumors said his wolf was twice the size of any normal alpha, that his eyes could pierce through lies, that he had never taken a mate because no wolf alive was strong enough to stand beside him. And now he was here, in Frostpine. Leora closed the door and leaned against it, her legs suddenly weak. She had no reason to attend the feast. She was nothing to the pack, a ghost they tolerated only because killing her outright would violate ancient laws. But an order was an order, and defying it would bring consequences she couldn't afford. She spent the day preparing in the only way she knew how. She mended the torn seam of her only decent dress, a simple gray wool garment that had once belonged to her mother. She combed her hair, long and dark, and braided it carefully. She scrubbed her face and hands in the icy water from the barrel outside, trying to look like something other than a woman who lived on the edge of starvation. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and ash, Leora wrapped herself in her cloak and began the long walk toward the Great Hall. The path was familiar, though she rarely traveled it anymore. It wound through the forest, past the den sites of the pack's families, past the training grounds where warriors sparred and honed their skills. As she walked, she saw other wolves heading in the same direction, families laughing together, young wolves shoving each other playfully, elders walking with quiet dignity. No one acknowledged her. She was a shadow, a mistake, a reminder of weakness in a pack that prided itself on strength. The Great Hall rose before her, massive and imposing, built from dark timber and stone. Light spilled from the windows, and the sound of voices, hundreds of voices, echoed into the night. Leora hesitated at the entrance, her hand on the heavy door. She could turn back. She could return to her hut and face whatever punishment came later. But something deeper than fear pushed her forward. Perhaps it was defiance. Perhaps it was the stubborn refusal to disappear entirely. She pulled the door open and stepped inside. The warmth hit her first, a wave of heat from the roaring fires that lined the hall. Then the noise, laughter, shouting, the clatter of plates and goblets. The scent of roasted meat and spiced wine filled the air, rich and overwhelming after months of bland, meager meals. Leora slipped along the wall, trying to make herself invisible. The hall was packed, every bench filled, every corner occupied. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat the pack's leaders, Alpha Roderick, a grizzled wolf with iron-gray hair and a perpetual scowl, his beta, a cunning woman named Mira, and beside them, the honored guest, Valor Draven. Leora's breath caught. He was nothing like she'd imagined. The legend spoke of a monster, a beast in human skin. But the man seated at the high table was something else entirely, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell to his collar, and a face carved from stone in shadow. His eyes were pale, almost silver, and they swept across the hall with the cold precision of a predator assessing prey. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply watched. Alpha Roderick was talking, his voice booming as he gestured wildly, trying to impress the king with tales of Frostpine's strength and loyalty. Valor listened without expression, his fingers resting lightly on the stem of his goblet. Leora found a spot near the back, partially hidden behind a wooden pillar. She could see the high table, but she doubted anyone would notice her here. She was good at being unseen. The feast continued, course after course, brought out by Omegas who moved with practiced efficiency. Leora's stomach cramped with hunger, but no one offered her a plate. She was not surprised. Then, halfway through the meal, Darian Voss stood. Leora's heart clenched. He looked the same, strong, confident, his dark eyes gleaming with ambition. He had taken a new mate, a beautiful Omega named Celine, who sat beside him now, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Darian raised his goblet. "A toast!" he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "To Alpha King Valor, whose strength honors our territory." The hall erupted in cheers. Valor inclined his head slightly, a gesture that could have been acknowledgement or dismissal. Darian wasn't finished. He turned, his eyes scanning the crowd, and Leora knew, she knew, what was coming before he even opened his mouth. "And to show our king the depth of our loyalty," Darian continued, his smile sharp, "let us offer him a song." His gaze landed on her, pinning her in place. "Leora Hale, come forward and sing for the Alpha King." The hall fell silent. Every head turned. Every eye found her. Leora's legs went numb. She stood frozen, her pulse roaring in her ears. Darian's smile widened. "Come now, Leora, don't be shy. Show the king what Frostpine's Omegas are capable of." It was a trap. A cruel joke designed to humiliate her in front of the most powerful wolf alive. The pack knew her voice was broken. They knew she couldn't sing the way an Omega should. This was entertainment for them. Watching her fail, watching her crumble. Laughter rippled through the crowd, quiet at first, then growing louder. Leora's hands trembled. She could refuse, she could run. But refusal would be seen as defiance, and defiance meant punishment. And running would only confirm what they already believed. That she was weak. That she was nothing. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. She stepped out from behind the pillar and walked toward the center of the hall, her chin lifted, her heart a hammer against her ribs. The crowd parted, their laughter following her like a shadow. She stopped in the open space before the high table and looked up. Alpha Roderick watched with barely concealed amusement. Mira smirked. Darian's expression was triumphant, victorious. And Valor Draven, his pale eyes rested on her, unreadable, cold. Leora swallowed hard. She had nothing left to lose. The pack had already taken everything. They'd stripped her of her mate, her purpose, her place. But they hadn't taken the songs her grandfather taught her. They hadn't taken the soul songs. She closed her eyes and reached deep into her memory, pulling out a melody that had been old when the world was young. Not a battle hymn, not a song of dominance, but a soul song, a melody meant to call through the wilderness, to bridge the distance between two lost hearts searching for each other across endless frozen lands. She opened her mouth and began to sing. Her voice was not perfect. It cracked on the first note, rough and broken, but she pushed through, pouring everything she had into the melody, her loneliness, her pain, her refusal to disappear. The laughter died. The hall went still. The soul song was nothing like the loud, brash hymns the pack favored. It was quiet, haunting, each note carrying the weight of centuries. It spoke of isolation, of endurance, of two souls wandering separate paths, calling out across the dark, hoping, always hoping, to be heard. Leora sang of cold nights and empty skies, of waiting, of longing, of a voice that refused to be silenced, no matter how broken. The melody rose, fragile and fierce, filling the vast hall with something the pack had forgotten existed: raw, unfiltered emotion. And then, in the final verse, her voice steadied, the rasp smoothed, the broken pieces aligned just for a moment, just long enough for the last note to ring out clear and true, a single perfect sound that pierced the silence like a blade. The note hung in the air, and then the world shattered. A goblet exploded against the stone floor, the sound like thunder in the stillness. Leora's eyes flew open. Valor Draven was on his feet, his chair toppled behind him. His pale eyes blazed, fixed on her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. His wolf surged forward, visible in the way his body went rigid, the way his hands clenched into fists. The entire hall stared. No one moved. No one breathed. Valor stepped down from the platform, his movements slow, deliberate. He walked toward her, closing the distance with predatory grace, his gaze never leaving her face. Leora stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. He stopped directly in front of her, towering over her, his presence overwhelming. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, his wolf barely contained beneath his skin. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough, carrying through the silent hall. "That song," he said. "Where did you learn it?" Leora's voice came out as a whisper. "My grandfather. He was a lore keeper." Valor's jaw tightened. "Do you know what it is?" She shook her head, unable to form words. His eyes burned into hers. "It's a mate call. An ancient song sung by wolves searching for their destined bond across impossible distances." His voice dropped, edged with something raw and fierce. "It's meant for only one listener. And I heard it." The hall erupted into chaos. But Valor didn't move. He reached out, his hand catching her chin, tilting her face up toward his. "You're mine," he said, the words a declaration and a vow. "You've always been mine." And Leora Hale, the broken Omega, the outcast, the forgotten, felt the world shift beneath her feet, because the Alpha King had just claimed her as his mate. The silence that followed Valor's declaration was absolute, suffocating. Every wolf in the great hall stood frozen, their eyes locked on the impossible scene unfolding before them. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, claiming the broken Omega as his mate. Leora couldn't breathe. Valor's hand remained firm against her chin, his pale eyes burning into hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. His wolf was right there, just beneath the surface, recognizing something in her that she didn't understand, something that called to him across time and distance. "No." The word cut through the silence like a blade. Darian Voss stepped forward, his face twisted with shock and fury. "Your Majesty, there must be some mistake. This woman, she's damaged. Her voice is broken. She can't even fulfill the basic duties of an Omega." Valor's head turned slowly toward Darian, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Are you questioning what I heard?" Darian faltered, but his ambition wouldn't let him back down completely. "I'm only saying that Leora Hale is not what she appears. I was her mate once. I know her weaknesses better than anyone." "Were," Valor said, his voice deadly quiet. "You were her mate. Past tense. You severed that bond." His fingers released Leora's chin, but he didn't step away. "Which means you have no claim here. No voice. No right to speak." Alpha Roderick rose from his seat, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes calculating. "Alpha King, perhaps we should discuss this privately. The girl has been unwell. We wouldn't want you to make a decision based on—" "I don't make mistakes," Valor interrupted, his gaze never leaving Leora. "The song she sang is a mate call that hasn't been heard in generations. My wolf recognized it, recognized her." He finally looked at Roderick, and the older Alpha visibly flinched. "Unless you're suggesting I don't know my own mate when I find her?" Roderick's jaw worked, but no words came out. Leora's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Mates were chosen by fate, by the ancient bonds that connected wolves to each other. But she'd already had a mate. Darien had been her bond, recognized by the pack, accepted by the elders. How could there be another? "I don't understand," she whispered, the words barely audible. Baelor's expression softened, just slightly, when he looked back at her. The bond you had before wasn't a true mate bond. It was a pack bond, chosen by elders, by convenience, by tradition, but not by fate. His voice lowered, meant only for her. True mates are rare. Most wolves never find them. They settle for pack bonds, and that's enough. But when a true bond exists, there's no mistaking it. The soul recognizes what it's been searching for. Behind them, the crowd erupted into whispers, the news rippling through the hall like wildfire. Leora could feel their eyes on her, could sense their disbelief, their resentment, their jealousy. Celine, Darien's current mate, pushed through the crowd, her beautiful face twisted with outrage. "This is absurd. She's nothing. A reject. You can't possibly—" "Enough." Baelor didn't raise his voice, but the single word carried such absolute authority that Celine's mouth snapped shut. He turned to address the entire hall, his presence commanding instant silence. "Leora Hale is my mate. That makes her your future queen. Anyone who questions this, anyone who disrespects her, answers to me personally." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Alpha Roderick recovered first, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Your Majesty. Frostpine is honored that one of our own has been chosen by the Alpha King." His voice carried false warmth. "Though I must say, this is quite unexpected. Perhaps the lady needs time to adjust to such sudden changes." Baelor's eyes narrowed. What Leora needs is to be treated with the respect she should have received all along. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "We'll talk. Privately." Before Leora could respond, he placed a hand on the small of her back and guided her through the crowd. Wolves parted before them like water, their faces a mixture of shock, envy, and poorly concealed hostility. She caught Darien's expression as they passed, his features frozen in disbelief and something darker. Rage. Humiliation. Baelor led her out of the great hall and into the cold night air. The sudden quiet was jarring after the chaos inside. He didn't stop walking until they reached the edge of the forest, where the trees created a barrier between them and the building. Then he released her and stepped back, giving her space. Leora wrapped her arms around herself, shivering from more than just the cold. "I don't understand any of this." "I know." Baelor's voice was calmer now, without the sharp edge of authority he'd used inside. "I didn't expect this either." She looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. In the moonlight, he seemed less like the fearsome legend and more like a man, a tired, lonely man who'd been searching for something he'd almost given up on finding. "Why did you recognize the song?" "Because I've been hearing it in my dreams for years," he said quietly. "Pieces of it. Never the whole thing, never clear enough to understand. Just fragments of a melody that haunted me every time I closed my eyes." He met her gaze. "Tonight, when you sang, it all came together. Every note I'd been searching for, all in one place. In one voice." Leora's throat tightened. "My voice is broken." "No," Baelor said firmly. "It's different. That's not the same as broken." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The song you sang, where did your grandfather learn it?" "He was a lore keeper. He knew all the old songs, the ones from before the territories were established." She hugged herself tighter. "He said they were soul songs, that they spoke the language the first wolves used before words existed." Baelor nodded slowly. "The mate call is the oldest of them all. It's sung by wolves who are destined to meet, but separated by distance, by circumstance, by fate itself. It's a beacon. A way of saying, 'I'm here, I'm waiting, find me.'" His eyes held hers. "You sang it tonight, and I heard it, because I've been searching for you my entire life." The weight of his words settled over her, terrifying and impossibly large. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I wasn't trying to—" "I know," he said gently. "You were trying to survive. You were trying to prove you weren't worthless." His jaw tightened. "They treated you like you were nothing. Leora looked away, the shame burning in her chest. Because I am nothing. My voice is damaged. I can't do what an Omega is supposed to do. Darian was right to reject me. Darian is a fool, Valor said flatly. And so is every wolf in that hall who made you believe you were less than you are. He stepped closer, his presence warm in the cold night. You sang a song that hasn't been heard in centuries. You called to me across the divide between true mates. That's not weakness, Leora. That's power they were too blind to see. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his words sink in and heal the wounds that had festered for 3 years. But belief was hard when you'd been told you were worthless for so long. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. Valor was quiet for a moment, considering. That's up to you. She blinked, startled. What do you mean? The bond is real. I feel it, and I know you do too, even if you don't understand it yet. His expression was serious, almost grave. But I won't force you into anything. You've had enough people making decisions for you, taking away your choices. I won't be another one. Leora stared at him, stunned. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf alive, was giving her a choice. Not demanding, not commanding, offering. If you want to come with me to accept the bond, I'll take you from this place tonight, Valor continued. You'll never have to return to Frostpine, never have to face these wolves again. You'll be my mate, my queen, and anyone who disrespects you will answer to me. And if I don't? The question came out before she could stop it. His expression didn't change. Then I'll leave. I'll honor your choice, even if it tears me apart to do it. He paused. But I'll also make sure the pack treats you with the respect you deserve. I'll put protections in place. You won't be cast out again. Leora's mind spun. Leave Frostpine. Leave the only home she'd ever known, even if that home had rejected her. Go with a man she'd just met, a king she didn't know, into a life she couldn't begin to imagine. Or stay. Stay in the hut on the edge of the territory. Stay invisible. Stay small. Stay safe in the terrible familiarity of her loneliness. I need time, she heard herself say. I need to think. Valor nodded, as if he'd expected this. You have until dawn. I'm leaving at first light. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver pendant on a chain, a wolf's head etched in intricate detail. Take this. If you decide to come with me, wear it. I'll know. She took the pendant, the metal cold against her palm. And if I don't? Then I'll know that too. His voice was soft, sad. Either way, you'll be protected. I give you my word. Before she could respond, voices echoed from the direction of the great hall. Valor's expression hardened. They're coming. Go back to your home. Don't let them corner you tonight. What about you? I'll handle the pack. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. They need to understand what happens when they mistreat someone under my protection. Leora hesitated, then nodded. She turned and ran, the pendant clutched in her hand, her heart pounding as she disappeared into the forest. Behind her, she heard Valor's voice, cold and commanding, addressing whoever had followed them out. But she didn't stop. She ran through the trees, her breath coming in gasps, until she reached the hut and slammed the door behind her. Only then did she collapse against the wall, her legs giving out. The pendant was still in her hand. She opened her fingers and looked at it, the silver catching the faint light from the dying fire. A wolf's head. A symbol of strength, of belonging, of everything she'd never had. She closed her fist around it and pressed it to her chest. Dawn was hours away. She had time to decide. Time to choose between the known misery of her current life and the terrifying unknown of a future she couldn't predict. But even as she sat there in the darkness, she already knew the truth. She'd made her choice the moment she sang that song. Sleep didn't come. Leora spent the night packing what few belongings she had. Her mother's dress, her grandfather's journal of songs, a few pieces of clothing, a carved wooden bird he'd made for her when she was a child. Everything that mattered fit into a single worn leather bag. She dressed carefully in the gray wool dress, braided her hair, and fastened the silver pendant around her neck. The metal rested against her collarbone, cool and solid, a reminder that this was real, that she was choosing this. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, She picked up her bag and walked out of the hut for the last time. The forest was quiet, the world holding its breath in the space between night and morning. Leora made her way toward the great hall, where Valor had said he'd be waiting. She expected to find him alone, or perhaps with his guards. She didn't expect to find half the pack gathered outside, blocking the path. Darian stood at the front of the crowd, his arms crossed, his expression thunderous. Beside him, Celine smirked, her eyes cold. Alpha Roderick was there too, along with Mira and several of the pack's strongest warriors. Leora stopped, her heart sinking. "Going somewhere?" Darian asked, his voice dripping with false concern. She straightened her shoulders, refusing to show fear. "That's none of your concern." "Oh, but it is," Celine said sweetly. "You're still a member of this pack, Leora. You can't just leave without permission." Alpha Roderick stepped forward, his expression grave. "The girl raises a valid point. Pack law requires that any wolf who wishes to leave must petition the Alpha and receive approval. You haven't done that." Leora's fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. "You threw me out. You made me live on the edge of the territory like I didn't exist. Now you want to claim I need permission to leave?" "Law is law," Roderick said simply. "And I'm afraid I can't approve your departure. Not when it would mean losing a wolf to another pack, especially not to the Alpha King. It sets a dangerous precedent." "You're not keeping her because of precedent," a voice said from behind the crowd. "You're keeping her because you're afraid." The crowd parted as Valor walked through, his presence commanding instant deference. His guards flanked him, 4 massive wolves who looked like they could tear through the entire pack without breaking a sweat. Valor's eyes found Leora, and something in his expression eased when he saw the pendant around her neck. Then his gaze shifted to Roderick, cold and unyielding. "You're making a mistake, Alpha." Roderick held his ground, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "I'm following pack law, Your Majesty. Surely you can respect that." "Pack law doesn't override mate bonds," Valor said quietly, "and it certainly doesn't give you the right to hold a wolf against her will." "She's not being held against her will," Darian interjected. "She's being asked to follow proper procedure. If she truly wants to leave, she can petition the Alpha and wait for approval like anyone else." Valor's smile was sharp and dangerous. "How long does that process take?" Roderick shifted uncomfortably. "It varies. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months." "Months," Valor repeated softly. "You want my mate to wait months for permission to leave a pack that's treated her like refuse for 3 years. He took a step forward, and the warriors behind Roderick instinctively backed up. "Let me be very clear. Leora is leaving with me today. Now. And if you try to stop her, I'll consider it an act of aggression against the crown." The threat was unmistakable. Roderick's face paled, but Darian wasn't done. "She was my mate first. I have a claim. You severed that claim." Valor's voice cracked like a whip. "You stood before your pack and declared her worthless, useless, broken. You cast her aside without a second thought. You don't get to claim her now just because someone else sees her value." Darian's face flushed with rage. "I made a mistake. I was young. I didn't understand." "You understood perfectly," Leora said, her voice cutting through his excuses. Everyone turned to look at her. She stepped forward, her chin lifted, her eyes blazing. "You understood that I couldn't serve your ambition anymore, that a broken Omega wouldn't help you climb the pack hierarchy, so you threw me away like I was nothing." Her voice shook, but she pushed on. "You didn't make a mistake, Darian. You made a choice, and now I'm making mine." She walked past him, past Roderick, past the entire crowd of wolves who'd watched her suffer and done nothing. She walked straight to Valor and stopped in front of him. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Valor's expression softened just for a moment before he turned back to the pack. "Anyone who follows us, anyone who tries to stop us, will be considered an enemy of the crown. Is that understood?" Silence. Then Alpha Roderick nodded stiffly. "Understood, Your Majesty." Valor took Leora's bag from her shoulder and handed it to one of his guards. Then he offered her his arm. She took it, her hand trembling slightly as she rested it in the crook of his elbow. Together, they walked away from Frostpine, leaving the stunned pack behind. They'd barely reached the edge of the territory when Leora heard footsteps running after them. She tensed, but Vialor held up a hand, signaling his guards to wait. A young Omega, barely 16, skidded to a stop a few yards away. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide. "Lady Leora!" she gasped. "Wait!" Leora recognized her. Nina, one of the younger Omegas who'd always watched Leora from a distance but never spoken to her. "What is it?" Leora asked gently. Nina glanced nervously at Veilor, then back at Leora. I wanted to thank you for singing last night, for showing us that being different doesn't mean being broken." Tears welled in her eyes. "You gave me hope." Leora's throat tightened. She stepped forward and took the girl's hand. "Be strong, Nina. Don't let them tell you what you're worth." Nina nodded, squeezing her hand once before turning and running back toward the pack. Veilor watched the exchange with something unreadable in his eyes. When they resumed walking, he spoke quietly. "You don't realize it yet, but what you did last night will change things. For Omegas. For wolves who've been told they're less than they are." Leora looked up at him. "I just sang a song." "You sang the truth," he corrected. "And truth has power, even when it comes from a broken voice." They walked in silence for a while, the forest gradually giving way to open ground. In the distance, Leora could see horses and a carriage waiting, along with more guards. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My fortress," Veilor said. "Ironhold. It's in the northern mountains, about 3 days' journey from here." 3 days. 3 days away from everything she'd ever known. 3 days toward a future she couldn't imagine. As they reached the carriage, Veilor helped her inside, then climbed in after her. The guards mounted their horses, and with a sharp whistle, the convoy began to move. Leora looked out the window as Frostpine disappeared behind the trees. She thought she'd feel relief, or fear, or sadness. Instead, she felt nothing but a strange, weightless sense of freedom. She was leaving behind the wolves who'd broken her, and walking toward the one who'd heard her song and answered. The carriage rolled through wilderness that grew wilder with each passing mile. Leora watched the landscape transform outside the window. The familiar pine forests of Frostpine giving way to jagged rock formations and steep mountain passes where snow clung to the slopes even in late winter. The air grew thinner, colder, carrying the bite of altitude and isolation. Veilor sat across from her, his long frame somehow fitting comfortably in the confined space. He'd been quiet for most of the journey, occasionally issuing orders to his guards when they stopped to rest the horses, but otherwise leaving Leora to her thoughts. She appreciated the silence. Her mind was still reeling from everything that had happened in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been nobody, a ghost haunting the edges of a pack that wanted to forget she existed. Today, she was supposedly the mate of the Alpha King, traveling toward a life she couldn't begin to comprehend. "You're afraid," Veilor said suddenly, breaking the silence. Leora's eyes snapped to his. "I'm not—" "You are," he said calmly. "I can feel it through the bond. It's faint, still forming, but it's there." He leaned forward slightly, his pale eyes studying her. "You don't have to pretend with me, Leora. Fear is honest." She looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "I don't know what you expect from me." "Nothing you're not willing to give," Veilor said. "But I understand the question. You want to know what being my mate means, what your life will look like." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Ironhold isn't like Frostpine. It's not a pack in the traditional sense. It's a fortress, a stronghold that serves as the seat of power for all the northern territories. Wolves from different packs live there, work there, serve there. It's a place of politics and strategy, alliances and betrayals." Leora's stomach tightened. "That sounds dangerous." "It is," Veilor admitted. "Being queen means navigating those dangers. It means understanding that every smile hides calculation. Every offer of friendship carries ulterior motive. The wolves at Ironhold will test you, push you, try to find your weaknesses." "Then they'll find plenty," Leora said bitterly. "I'm weak, broken." "Exactly what they'll expect from someone you found in a forgotten corner of Frostpine." Veilor's expression hardened. "You survived 3 years of isolation and cruelty with nothing but your own strength. You sang a song that brought the most powerful alpha in the territories to his knees. You walked away from everything you knew with your head held high." His voice dropped, intense. "That's not weakness, Leora. That's steel wrapped in skin. She wanted to believe him, but years of being told otherwise had carved those beliefs deep into her bones. "What if I fail?" she whispered. "What if I can't be what they need? What you need?" Baylor leaned back, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then we'll face that together. But I don't think you'll fail. I think you'll surprise everyone, including yourself." The carriage hit a rough patch of road, jostling them both. Outside, one of the guards shouted a warning, and the horses slowed to navigate a narrow mountain pass where the path crumbled away into a sheer drop on one side. Valor glanced out the window, his expression tightening. "We're close. Another hour, and we'll be at Ironhold's outer gates." Leora's pulse quickened. An hour. In an hour, her new life would begin, whether she was ready or not. The pass opened up into a valley, and suddenly Ironhold rose before them like something carved from the mountain itself. Massive stone walls, dark and imposing, stretched up toward the sky. Towers jutted from the fortress at irregular intervals, their peaks crowned with iron spikes. Even from a distance, Leora could see wolves moving along the ramparts, guards, warriors, sentries watching every approach. "It's a fortress," she breathed. "It has to be," Valor said. "The Northern Territories are always one bad winter or one ambitious challenger away from chaos. Ironhold keeps the peace through strength." He paused. "And fear, if I'm being honest." The gates opened as they approached, massive iron-reinforced doors that groaned on their hinges. The carriage rolled through into a courtyard filled with activity, wolves training in combat formations, messengers running between buildings, servants hauling supplies. All of it stopped the moment Valor stepped out of the carriage. Every head turned. Every wolf dropped into a bow or a kneel, their submission instant and absolute. Valor offered his hand to Leora, helping her down from the carriage. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, assessing, judging, calculating. Her fingers tightened on Valor's arm. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They're trying to intimidate you. Don't give them the satisfaction." A tall woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp features approached, her bearing regal despite the plain leather armor she wore. She bowed to Valor, but her eyes went immediately to Leora, cold and appraising. "Your Majesty," the woman said, "we weren't expecting you back so soon." "Plans changed, Kyle," Valor said. "This is Leora Hale, my mate." Kale's expression didn't flicker, but something predatory gleamed in her eyes. "I see. Welcome to Ironhold, Lady Leora." "Busy." The title sounded like mockery, though the woman's tone was perfectly polite. "Kyle is my second-in-command," Valor explained. "She runs Ironhold when I'm away." "And apparently even when you're not," Kyle said with a thin smile. "Shall I prepare the formal announcement? The court will want to meet their new queen." "Tomorrow," Valor said firmly. "Tonight, we rest." Kale bowed again, but her eyes stayed on Leora for a beat too long before she turned and walked away, barking orders to the servants. Valor led Leora through the fortress, up stone staircases and along corridors lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Wolves they passed bowed and murmured greetings, but Leora could feel their curiosity, their skepticism, their doubt. Finally, Valor stopped before a heavy wooden door. "These will be your chambers. Mine are connected through that door." He gestured to a second entrance on the far wall. "You'll have privacy when you need it, but we're never far apart." He pushed the door open, revealing a room that took Leora's breath away. It was larger than her entire hut in Frostpine. A massive bed draped in furs dominated one wall, a fireplace already crackled with warmth. Windows overlooked the valley below, the view stretching for miles. "It's too much," Leora said quietly. "It's what you deserve," Valor countered. He set her bag down on a chair. "Rest. I'll have food sent up. Tomorrow will be difficult, and you'll need your strength." He turned to leave, but Leora's voice stopped him. "Valor." He looked back. "Why do they already hate me?" she asked. "They don't even know me." His expression was somber. "Because you're an outsider. Because you weren't chosen through the careful political alliances they'd arranged. Because they're afraid of what you represent. Change, unpredictability, a variable they can't control." He paused. "And because they can sense I care about you, which makes you a weakness they'll want to exploit." The honesty was brutal, but Leora appreciated it. How do I survive here? She asked. Valor's smile was grim. The same way you survived Frostpine, by refusing to break. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Leora stood alone in the vast chamber, the weight of the day finally crashing down on her. She walked to the window and looked out at the darkening sky, the mountains stretching endlessly in every direction. She'd escaped one prison only to find herself in another, this one gilded and beautiful, but a prison nonetheless. The formal presentation came sooner than Leora expected. She woke to servants entering her chambers with elaborate gowns, jewelry, and instructions on how a queen was expected to dress. They worked in efficient silence, pinning her hair into an intricate style, lacing her into a deep blue gown that felt like armor against her skin. When they finally stepped back, Leora barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked regal, polished, nothing like the broken Omega from Frostpine. But underneath the finery, her hands still trembled. Valor met her outside the throne room, looking every inch the king in black leather and silver. His eyes traveled over her, something like approval flickering in their depths. "You look like a queen," he said quietly. "I feel like a fraud," Leora admitted. "Good," Valor said. "That means you understand how high the stakes are." He offered his arm. "They're going to test you today, push you, try to break you. Don't let them." But the throne room was packed with wolves, nobility, warriors, advisors, all gathered to see the woman their king had chosen. The conversation died the moment the doors opened and Valor entered with Leora at his side. They walked down a long aisle between the assembled crowd, heading toward two thrones at the far end of the room. Leora kept her chin up, her expression carefully neutral, even as she felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her from every direction. Valor stopped before the thrones and turned to address the room. "I present to you Leora Hale," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "My true mate, your queen." The silence that followed was deafening. Then a voice called out from the crowd. "How do we know she's truly your mate, your majesty?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Valor's expression darkened. "Are you questioning my word?" "Of course not," the voice continued. A tall, elegant wolf stepped forward, a woman with auburn hair and cold green eyes. "But surely you understand our concern. You've never taken a mate before. Now you return from a minor territory with a claimed bond to an unknown Omega. We simply wish to verify the claim." Leora recognized the trap immediately. They were calling Valor's judgment into question without openly defying him. And if he couldn't prove the bond, they'd undermine both his authority and her legitimacy. "The bond is recognized by my wolf," Valor said coldly. "That's all the verification required." "With respect, your majesty," Kael said, stepping forward from her position near the throne. "There is precedent for requesting a demonstration. The ancient laws allow the court to witness a bond's strength through the calling." Leora's blood went cold. She'd heard of the calling, an ancient ritual where mates demonstrated their bond by having one partner call and the other answer, their wolves recognizing each other across distance and through any interference. But her wolf was damaged, weak. She'd never been able to shift properly after the fever, her transformations incomplete and painful. There was no way she could complete a calling. Valor's jaw tightened. "The calling is a barbaric practice. It's tradition," the auburn-haired woman said smoothly, "and tradition is what holds the territories together. Surely you wouldn't deny us this reassurance." It was a brilliant trap. Refuse, and he looked weak, willing to break tradition for a questionable mate. Except, and Leora would likely fail, proving them right. Valor looked at Leora, conflict clear in his eyes. She could see him calculating, searching for a way out. She made the decision for him. "I accept the calling," Leora said clearly. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Valor's head whipped toward her. "Leora, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "Because if I don't, they'll never accept me. They'll always question, always doubt." She straightened her shoulders. "I may be broken, but I'm not a coward." Something fierce and proud flashed in Valor's eyes. He nodded slowly, then turned back to the court. "Very well. We accept the challenge." The court moved outside to the fortress's central plaza where the calling would take place. Leora and Valor were separated. He was taken to one end of the plaza, she to the other, with at least 100 yards and a crowd of wolves between them. Kael approached Leora, her expression unreadable. The rules are simple. You call to your mate. If the bond is true, his wolf will answer, no matter the distance or interference. You'll have one chance. Leora nodded, her mouth dry. I'll be honest with you, Kael said quietly, so only Leora could hear. I don't think you can do this. You're weak, untrained, and desperate. You'll fail, and when you do, Valor will be forced to reject you to save face. She smiled coldly. I almost feel sorry for you. Then she stepped back, leaving Leora alone in the center of hostile eyes. Across the plaza, Valor stood watching her, his expression controlled but his eyes intense. He believed in her. She could feel it through the faint threads of the bond forming between them. But belief wasn't enough. She needed power, and her wolf had never been strong enough to give her that. Leora closed her eyes and reached deep inside, searching for the part of her that was wolf. She found it cowering in the darkness, small and damaged and afraid. The fever had broken something fundamental in her shift, left her wolf fractured and incomplete. Please, she whispered to the broken creature inside her. I need you, just this once. Please be strong enough. The wolf whimpered, retreating further. Panic clawed at Leora's throat. She couldn't do this. Kael was right. She was too weak, too damaged. The calling required a strong wolf, a confident shift, the ability to project power across distance. She had none of those things. The crowd began to murmur, sensing her hesitation. Someone laughed. Another voice called out mockery. And then, from across the plaza, she heard it. A low, resonant sound. Not quite a howl, but something deeper. Ancient. Valor's wolf calling to hers, offering strength, offering connection, offering everything he had across the space between them. Leora's eyes flew open. The sound wrapped around her broken wolf, gentle but insistent, not demanding strength, offering it, and suddenly she understood. She didn't need to be strong alone. That was the point of the bond. True mates didn't require perfection from each other. They completed each other's broken pieces. Leora stopped trying to force her wolf to be something it wasn't. Instead, she let it be exactly what it was. Small, damaged, but still present. Still fighting, still refusing to disappear. She opened her mouth and sang. Not a howl, not the traditional response to a calling, but the soul song, the same melody she'd sung in Frostpine, the mate call that had brought Valor to his knees. Her broken voice filled the plaza, raw and imperfect but achingly honest. She sang of loneliness and survival, of searching through endless darkness, of two damaged souls finding each other against impossible odds. The crowd went silent. And then Valor's wolf answered. His howl rose, deep and powerful, intertwining with her melody in perfect harmony. Where her voice was broken, his was whole. Where hers was quiet, his was thunder. Together, they created something neither could have made alone, a song of completion, of two halves recognizing each other across the void. The bond between them flared to life, brilliant and undeniable. Every wolf in the plaza felt it, the sheer force of a true mate bond snapping into place, ancient and powerful and absolutely real. Leora's eyes found Valor's across the distance. His wolf blazed in his gaze, silver and fierce and hers. Completely hers. The calling ended, the last notes fading into stunned silence. Then Valor moved. He crossed the plaza in long, purposeful strides, ignoring protocol, ignoring the crowd, ignoring everything but her. He reached Leora and pulled her into his arms, his forehead resting against hers. Magnificent, he breathed. You were magnificent. Around them, the court slowly began to bow. One by one, they knelt, acknowledging what they'd just witnessed. The bond was real, undeniable, powerful beyond anything they'd expected. Leora had won. But as she stood there in Valor's embrace, surrounded by kneeling wolves who moments ago had wanted her to fail, she caught sight of Kael's face in the crowd. The woman wasn't kneeling. She stood rigid, her expression frozen in fury and something else. Something that looked like fear. And Leora realized with sudden clarity that she'd just made a very dangerous enemy. The celebration that night was mandatory but tense. Valor had declared a feast in honor of the confirmed bond, and the court had no choice but to attend. Leora sat beside him at the high table, her hand in his, the silver pendant at her throat catching the firelight. Wine flowed. Food was served. Toasts were made, each one more elaborate than the last. But underneath the forced festivity, Leora could feel the undercurrents of resentment and calculation. "You're doing well," Valor murmured, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "They're afraid of you now. That's good." "I don't want them to be afraid," Leora said quietly. "I want them to accept me. Fear comes first, acceptance later." His eyes scanned the room. Right now, they're trying to figure out how to use you or get rid of you. Once they realize neither is possible, they'll settle for acceptance. Leora's stomach turned. "This is going to be my life, isn't it? Constant battles? Constant tests." "Yes," Valor said honestly. "But you won't face them alone." A servant approached the table, bowing low. "Your Majesty, a messenger has arrived from Frostpine. He requests urgent audience." Valor's expression darkened. "Frostpine? He says it's about Lady Leora." Leora's blood went cold. Valor's hand tightened on hers. "Bring him in." The messenger was young, his clothes travel-stained and his face pale with exhaustion. He bowed deeply before speaking. "Your Majesty, Alpha Roderick sends word. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" Valor's voice was sharp. The messenger swallowed hard. 3 days ago, shortly after you left with Lady Leora, wolves began falling ill. At first we thought it was a seasonal sickness, but it spread rapidly. Nearly half the pack is affected now, and several have died. Leora's hand flew to her mouth. "The healers have identified the source," the messenger continued, his voice shaking. "It's a poison. Someone contaminated the pack's water supply." He paused, his next words barely a whisper. "And the evidence points to Lady Leora as the one who did it." The hall erupted in chaos. Valor surged to his feet, his wolf blazing to the surface. "That's impossible. Leora was with me. She couldn't have—" "The poison was planted before she left," the messenger interrupted, his words coming faster now. "Hidden in a container near her hut, they found traces of the same substance in her belongings. Alpha Roderick believes she poisoned the pack out of revenge for her treatment, then fled with you before anyone could discover what she'd done." "It's a lie!" Leora stood, her voice cracking. "I would never! I didn't!" But around the hall, she saw the doubt creeping into faces. The calculation. The willingness to believe the worst. Kale stood, her voice cutting through the noise. "Your Majesty, this is a serious accusation. Poisoning an entire pack is an act of war. Even if Lady Leora is your mate, she must answer these charges." "She will not," Valor snarled. "This is obviously a setup. Roderick is trying to discredit her." "Then let her prove her innocence," Kyle said smoothly. "Let her return to Frostpine and face trial. If she's truly innocent, she has nothing to fear." "I won't send her back to a pack that wants her dead." "Then you're admitting she's guilty," Kyle said quietly. The trap closed around them like iron jaws. Refused to let Leora face trial, and Valor looked like he was protecting a murderer, undermining his own authority and the law he was supposed to uphold. Send her back and she'd be walking into a death sentence, guilty or not. Leora's mind raced. She understood now. This had been planned from the beginning. Roderick, Darian, maybe even Kyle, they'd conspired to destroy her credibility, to force Valor into an impossible position. And the only way out was for her to make the choice herself. "I'll go," Leora said. Every head in the hall turned toward her. "Leora, no," Valor said, his voice rough with barely contained fury. "I have to," she said, meeting his eyes. "If I don't, they'll use this to destroy you. They'll say you value your mate above justice, above the law. Your authority will crumble." She swallowed hard. "I won't let that happen." "You'll die," Valor said flatly. "They'll execute you whether you're guilty or not." "Then you'll have to make sure that doesn't happen," Leora said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Send me with your best guards. Come yourself if you have to, but I'll face this trial and prove my innocence." Valor stared at her, conflict warring in his eyes. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze blood. We returned to Frostpine, together. He turned to address the hall. And if anyone there has harmed a hair on my mate's head, I will burn that territory to the ground. The feast dissolved into frantic preparation. Within hours, they were riding back the way they'd come, Veilor's entire guard accompanying them. Leora sat in the carriage, her hands clenched in her lap, watching the mountains give way to forest. She was returning to the place that had destroyed her, to face an accusation she couldn't defend against, surrounded by wolves who wanted her dead. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, the trap was waiting to close. The journey back to Frostpine felt like riding toward an execution. Leora watched the landscape reverse itself through the carriage window, the mountains shrinking behind them, the forest growing denser, the familiar territory emerging like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Veilor hadn't spoken much since they'd left Ironhold. He sat across from her, his jaw tight, his eyes distant as he calculated strategies and contingencies. His hand rested on the hilt of the blade at his side, fingers drumming a restless pattern against the leather grip. "Tell me about the water supply," he said finally, breaking the heavy silence. Leora pulled her attention from the window. "What do you mean?" "In Frostpine. Where does the pack get its water? How is it distributed?" She thought back, trying to remember details she'd never paid much attention to. "There's a main well in the center of the territory. It feeds into a system of troughs and cisterns that supply the different den sites. My hut was too far from the main system, so I collected rainwater and melted snow." Veilor's eyes sharpened. "So you never used the communal water supply?" "Not for 3 years," Leora said. "Not since they moved me to the edge of the territory." "Which means you'd have no reason to poison it," Veilor said, his voice edged with grim satisfaction. "No access, no motive beyond general revenge, which is weak. Any competent investigator would see that immediately." "Unless they don't want to see it," Leora said quietly. "Unless the point isn't to find the truth, but to have an excuse to get rid of me." Veilor's expression darkened. "Then we'll force them to see it. We'll find the real culprit and drag them into the light." Leora wanted to share his confidence, but fear coiled tight in her stomach. She'd lived in Frostpine long enough to know how pack justice worked. Truth mattered less than power. And right now, the pack wanted her gone badly enough to overlook any inconsistencies in the evidence. The carriage hit a rough patch of road, and Veilor leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "Leora, listen to me carefully. When we arrive, stay close to my guards. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't eat or drink anything that hasn't been tested. Trust no one from Frostpine. Not the healers, not the witnesses, not even wolves who seem sympathetic." "You think someone will try to kill me before the trial?" "I think they've already tried," Veilor said grimly. "This whole accusation is designed to either execute you legally or force you into a position where an accident can happen. Either way, you end up dead, and I'm left without a mate, weakened and vulnerable." The pieces clicked into place in Leora's mind. "This isn't just about me. Someone's using me to get to you." "Yes." Veilor's eyes were cold silver. "And when I find out who, they'll wish they'd never been born." They reached Frostpine at dusk, the sky bleeding red and orange above the tree line. A delegation waited at the territory's border. Alpha Roderick, Beta Mira, and a handful of warriors. Conspicuously absent was Darian Voss. The carriage stopped, and Veilor stepped out first, his presence immediately commanding the space. Leora followed, flanked by 4 of his largest guards. Roderick bowed, the gesture respectful, but his eyes calculating. "Your Majesty, we're grateful you've come personally to oversee this matter." "I'm here to prove my mate's innocence," Veilor said coldly, "not to oversee a lynching disguised as justice." Roderick's smile was thin. "Of course, we want only the truth." "Then you won't mind if my people conduct their own investigation," Veilor said. It wasn't a question. Something flickered in Roderick's eyes, annoyance, maybe fear, but he nodded. "Naturally, we have nothing to hide." Liar, Leora thought. She could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way Mira's hand drifted toward the knife at her belt. They were hiding something. The question was what? They were escorted to the Great Hall, the same building where Leora had sung just days ago. Now it felt different, hostile, oppressive, the air thick with anticipation. Wolves lined the walls, their eyes following Leora with open suspicion and poorly concealed hatred. At the center of the hall, someone had set up a makeshift tribunal, a long table where Roderick and the pack's elders would sit in judgment, and a space in front of it where the accused would stand. Leora's space. "The trial will begin at dawn," Roderick announced. "Until then, Lady Leora will be confined to quarters under guard." "She'll be confined to quarters under my guard," Valor corrected sharply. "Your wolves don't go near her." Roderick's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "As you wish, Your Majesty." They were taken to a small building near the Great Hall, better than Leora's old hut, but still sparse and cold. Valor's guards positioned themselves outside while he checked every corner of the room, every window, every potential entry point. Only when he was satisfied did he turn to Leora. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be difficult." But Leora's mind was already racing, pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together. "Valor, who benefits most if I'm executed?" He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Leora said, pacing the small room. "If I die, you lose your mate. You're weakened emotionally, maybe politically, but who gains?" Valor's eyes narrowed as he followed her logic. "Someone who wants to destabilize my authority. Someone who either wants my position or wants to install someone more controllable." He paused. "Kael." "Maybe," Leora said, "but there's another possibility. What if this isn't about Ironhold at all? What if someone in Frostpine wants something badly enough to risk your wrath?" "Like what?" Leora stopped pacing, a memory surfacing. "Before you arrived, Roderick was trying to expand Frostpine's territory. He wanted to push into the northern valleys, claim more hunting grounds. But he couldn't do it without approval from the crown. From you." Valor's expression went cold with understanding. "And if I'm distracted by my mate's trial and execution, if I'm emotionally compromised and politically weakened, I'm less likely to notice or care about territorial expansion. Or more likely to grant it just to make the problem go away," Leora added. They stared at each other as the implications settled. "It's still speculation," Valor said. "We need proof." "Then we find it," Leora said. "Before dawn." Valor's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're talking about investigating while they think you're resting, going behind their backs." "I'm talking about survival," Leora corrected. "And I know this territory better than any of your guards. I know where wolves go when they don't want to be seen, where they hide things they don't want found. It's too dangerous." "It's more dangerous to walk into that trial blind," Leora shot back. "They've already framed me once. What's to stop them from manufacturing more evidence, more witnesses? We need leverage, Valor. We need something that forces them to tell the truth." He studied her for a long moment, conflict clear in his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. 1 hour. You take 2 of my guards, stay in wolf form for speed and stealth. If anything goes wrong, I run straight back here, Leora finished. She shifted, the transformation easier with Valor's presence strengthening the bond. Her wolf was still small, still damaged, but it was enough. She slipped out through a window the guards had left unlatched, 2 of Valor's wolves flanking her in the darkness. Frostpine at night was a different world. Leora moved through shadows she knew intimately, past dens where she'd once been welcome, through paths she'd walked alone for years. Her guards followed silently, trusting her knowledge of the terrain. She led them to the well first, the central water source. Even in the darkness, she could smell the sickness, a faint, acrid scent that didn't belong. Someone had definitely poisoned it, but the how and when were still unclear. She circled the well, nose to the ground, searching for anything unusual. Her guards watched the perimeter, alert for any approach. Then she found it, a disturbed patch of earth near the well's stone base, recently covered over but not carefully. She dug, her claws scraping through dirt and snow until they hit something solid. A leather pouch, still half full of powder that reeked of the same acrid poison. But it was what was wrapped around the pouch that made Leora's blood run cold. A piece of cloth torn from a cloak. Not her cloak, but she recognized the pattern. It belonged to one of the pack's healers, a woman named Senna, who'd always been loyal to Roderick. Leora carefully took the pouch in her jaws and signaled her guards. They needed to search Senna's den. They moved quickly through the territory, staying low and quiet. Senna's den was dark, empty. The healer was probably attending the sick wolves in the infirmary. Leora shifted back to human form long enough to search the dwelling while her guards kept watch outside. She found it in a locked chest under Senna's bed. Letters, written in Roderick's hand, detailing payment for services rendered. Instructions on where to plant evidence. A promise of status and territory once the problem was dealt with. And one letter that confirmed everything. A note from Darian Voss, pledging his support to Roderick's expansion plans in exchange for being named Beta once Mira was retired. It was a conspiracy. Multiple wolves working together to frame Leora, knowing her death would weaken Valor and give them room to pursue their own ambitions. Leora gathered the letters, her hands shaking with fury and vindication. This was the proof they needed. This would force the truth into the open. She'd just finished tucking the letters into her shirt when she heard voices outside, wolves returning, more than her 2 guards could handle alone. She shifted quickly and ran, her guards flanking her as they raced back through the territory. Behind them, she heard shouts of alarm, the sound of pursuit beginning. They made it back to the quarters with seconds to spare, Leora diving through the window just as the door burst open. Valor was there instantly, taking in her disheveled appearance and the precious letters she clutched. "Did you find it?" "Everything," Leora gasped, shifting back to human form. "Proof of the conspiracy, names, payment records, it's all here." Valor took the letters and read quickly, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, his eyes blazed with cold fury. "They'll pay," he said quietly. "All of them." Outside, they could hear the commotion, wolves shouting, guards scrambling, someone demanding to know who'd broken into Senna's den. "They know someone was there," Leora said. "They'll come for the evidence." "Let them try." Valor moved to the door and pulled it open, facing the crowd of Frostpine wolves that had gathered. "Roderick, get out here, now!" The Alpha appeared, his face flushed with anger and barely concealed panic. "Your Majesty, there's been a breach." "I know," Valor said coldly. "My mate found evidence that proves her innocence and exposes a conspiracy to frame her." He held up the letters. "Your conspiracy, Roderick. Yours and Darian Voss and your healer Senna." The crowd went silent, Roderick's face drained of color. "Those are forgeries. Someone planted—" "Don't insult my intelligence," Valor cut him off. "These are in your hand with your seal. They detail exactly how you plan to frame Leora, execute her, and use the resulting chaos to expand your territory without royal oversight." His voice dropped to something lethal. "Did you really think you could manipulate me so easily?" Mira stepped forward, her expression shocked. "Alpha Roderick, is this true?" Roderick's mouth worked, but no words came out. Then Darian Voss pushed through the crowd, his face desperate. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. We just wanted her gone, wanted things to go back to normal. You poisoned your own pack," Valor said, his voice shaking with barely restrained rage. "You killed your own wolves just to frame one woman because she had the audacity to be chosen as my mate." The crowd erupted in chaos, shouts of disbelief, cries of outrage, wolves turning on their leaders with fury in their eyes. Leora stood in the doorway, watching as the conspiracy crumbled before her. The wolves who'd wanted her dead were now exposed, their crimes laid bare for all to see. Roderick tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Valor's guards brought him down, pinning him to the frozen ground. Darian didn't even try to flee. He just sank to his knees, his face buried in his hands. Valor turned to the pack, his voice ringing with authority. "By the laws of the Northern Territories, I charge Alpha Roderick, Darian Voss, and the healer Senna with conspiracy, poisoning, and attempted murder of my mate. They will be tried at dawn, and if found guilty, they will face execution." Silence fell over the assembled wolves, heavy and absolute. Then, one by one, they began to kneel. Not in submission to their disgraced leaders, but in acknowledgement of the truth, in recognition of the justice about to be served. Mira was the first to speak, her voice clear in the stillness. "The Beta Council recognizes the charges. We will oversee the trial to ensure fairness." Other voices joined hers, elders, warriors, even some who'd stood silent while Leora suffered. They were ready to see justice done, now that they understood what had really happened. Valor returned to Leora's side, his hand finding hers. "It's not over yet," he murmured. "But you've won the first battle." Leora looked out at the pack, at the wolves who'd rejected her, mocked her, wanted her dead. They weren't kneeling to her yet, not really, but they were seeing her, perhaps for the first time. Not as a broken Omega, Not as a worthless reject, but as someone who'd fought back, someone who'd refused to die quietly, someone who'd uncovered the truth when everyone else had been content with comfortable lies. The trial at dawn was swift and brutal. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies damning. Roderick, Darian, and Senna were all found guilty. Their sentences were pronounced before the entire pack, exile for life, stripped of rank and territory, marked as traitors. It was Darian's face that Leora would remember most. Not angry, not defiant, just broken, staring at her with hollow eyes as the guards led him away in chains. "I'm sorry," he said as he passed her. "For everything. I was wrong about you, so wrong." Leora said nothing. There was nothing to say. His apology couldn't undo 3 years of suffering, couldn't resurrect the life she'd lost. But it was still something, a crack in the armor of certainty that had protected him from confronting what he'd done. Mira approached after the condemned had been taken away, her expression somber. "Lady Leora, on behalf of Frostpine, I apologize for the injustice you've suffered. We failed you. I failed you." Leora studied the beta, searching for sincerity. She found it, genuine remorse, genuine shame. "You believed what you were told to believe," Leora said quietly. "That doesn't make it right, but I understand it." "Will you ever forgive us?" Mira asked. Leora thought about that question for a long moment. Then she said, "I'll forgive you when you make sure this never happens to anyone else. When you protect the weak instead of discarding them. When you value truth over convenience." Mira nodded slowly. "We'll try. I promise we'll try." It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. Valor watched the exchange from a distance, giving Leora space to have this moment. When Mira walked away, he came to stand beside her. "The Pack Council has requested that you stay," he said, "that you take a position here. Help rebuild what was broken." Leora's laugh was bitter. "They want me to stay? After everything?" "They want to make amends," Valor said. "Or at least they want to try." He paused. "But the choice is yours, Leora. It always has been." She looked around at the territory that had been her prison for so long. At the wolves who'd rejected her, who were now watching her with something that might have been respect, or might have been guilt. She thought about the young Omega, Nina, who'd thanked her for giving her hope. She thought about all the other wolves like her, the broken ones, the different ones, the ones the pack had decided weren't worth keeping. "I'll stay," Leora said finally, "but not for them. For the ones they've forgotten, the ones they've thrown away." She met Valor's eyes. "I'll stay long enough to make sure no one else has to live in a hut on the edge of the territory wondering if they're worth anything at all." Valor's smile was fierce and proud. "Then we'll stay together, and we'll make sure they remember what happens when they forget a wolf's worth." The announcement was made that afternoon. Leora and Vialor would remain in Frostpine for 1 full season, overseeing the territory's restructuring and ensuring new leadership was properly established. But more than that, Leora would be establishing something new, a sanctuary within the pack for wolves who didn't fit the traditional roles, who needed support and protection, and someone to believe in them. The pack didn't cheer when the announcement was made, but they didn't object either. They simply accepted it, understanding that they had no right to refuse. That night there was no feast, no celebration, just quiet conversations around fires, wolves processing what had happened, what they'd learned about themselves and their leaders. Leora stood at the edge of the territory, looking out at the forest. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the pack settling in for the night, voices, laughter, the ordinary sounds of life continuing. Vialor came to stand beside her, his shoulder warm against hers. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Terrified," Leora admitted. "I have no idea how to rebuild a pack, how to lead, how to be what they need." "Good," Valor said. "Fear means you understand the responsibility, and understanding the responsibility means you won't abuse the power." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "The broken Omega," Leora said softly. "That's what they called me." "And what do you call yourself now?" Valor asked. Leora thought about the question, about the song she'd sung, about the truth she'd uncovered, about the wolves she'd saved. "Survivor," she said finally. someone who refused to break no matter how hard they tried to shatter her. Veilor's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers. "And my queen," he added quietly. Leora looked up at him, at this fierce, lonely king who'd heard her song and answered. "And your queen," she agreed. The future was uncertain. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in 3 years, Leora felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of survival, but the solid, determined hope of someone who'd fought and won, who'd proven her worth not through power or perfection, but through refusing to disappear. The pack had wanted her gone. Instead, she'd become the one thing they could never ignore. Someone who mattered. The season changed slowly over Frostpine, winter loosening its grip one grudging day at a time. Snow melted into mud, revealing ground that hadn't seen sunlight in months. Ice retreated from the edges of streams, and the first brave shoots of green began pushing through the frozen earth. Leora watched the transformation from the window of what had once been a storage building and was now her sanctuary, a place where wolves who didn't fit could find shelter, training, and someone who understood what it meant to be cast aside. 3 months had passed since the trial. 3 months of rebuilding, restructuring, and forcing Frostpine to confront the comfortable cruelties it had allowed to fester for generations. 3 months of proving that change, while painful and slow, was possible. It hadn't been easy. The first Omega who'd come to the sanctuary had been Nina, the young wolf who'd thanked Leora after the feast. She'd arrived in the dead of night, a bruise darkening her cheek and terror in her eyes, clutching a small bag of belongings and trembling so hard she could barely stand. "My father says I'm too weak," she'd whispered, her voice breaking. "He wants to marry me off to a warrior from the Eastern Pack, someone who'll make me stronger through their bloodline. He says it's my duty to improve our family's standing, but I don't want that. I don't want to be seen as just a breeding tool, just a way to climb the hierarchy." Leora had taken her in without hesitation, had given her a bed and safety, and the promise that no one would force her into a life she didn't choose. Within a week, 3 more Omegas had followed, wolves who'd been pushed into roles they didn't want, told their value existed only in service to others' ambitions, their own dreams and desires irrelevant to the pack's larger plans. But it wasn't just Omegas. A young beta male with a twisted leg, deemed unfit for warrior training despite his keen mind and strategic brilliance, had shown up asking if there was space for someone who wanted to be a healer instead of a fighter. An elder wolf, too old to hunt but sharp as a blade, had offered to teach the old songs, the lore that Frostpine had forgotten in its obsession with strength and dominance. A female with anxiety so severe she couldn't function in large groups had come seeking work she could do alone, away from the constant pressure to perform and prove herself. The sanctuary grew from a building into a community, and the pack watched with a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. Some wolves muttered that Leora was coddling weakness, creating a haven for those who should be forced to toughen up or be cast out entirely. Others watched quietly, their expressions thoughtful, as if reconsidering beliefs they'd held their entire lives. Veilor had stayed true to his word, remaining in Frostpine and supporting Leora's work even when it meant confronting wolves who resented the changes. His presence was both shield and sword, protection when she needed it, authority when wolves tried to undermine her, and unwavering support when she doubted herself in the darkest hours of the night. But he also knew when to step back, to let Leora fight her own battles, to allow her to prove herself without his shadow looming over every interaction. Like now. Leora stood in the center of the training grounds, facing a semicircle of Frostpine's warriors. They challenged her right to train the sanctuary wolves in combat, claiming it was dangerous to give fighting skills to those who couldn't be trusted with them, who might use that training to lash out at the pack that had rejected them. The real objection, Leora knew, was fear. Fear that the wolves they dismissed might become strong enough to challenge the hierarchy that had kept them down. Fear that power structures built on the assumption that certain wolves were inherently lesser might crumble if those wolves proved themselves equal. "You want to know if they can be trusted with combat training?" Leora asked, her voice carrying across the grounds with a confidence she'd built over 3 hard months. "Then test them. Put your best warrior against mine, and we'll see who's truly dangerous." The lead warrior, a massive male named Garrett, with shoulders like a bull, and a reputation for brutality in the sparring ring, stepped forward with a smirk. You can't be serious. Your sanctuary is full of weaklings and rejects. They wouldn't last 30 seconds against a real fighter. Then you have nothing to worry about, Leora said calmly, meeting his eyes without flinching. Unless you're afraid of being embarrassed by someone you've already decided is beneath you. Garrett's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of anger. Fine. I'll fight whoever you choose, and when I win, you shut down this sanctuary nonsense and stop filling these wolves' heads with false hope about being something they're not meant to be. And when my fighter wins, Leora countered, her voice steady and clear, you accept that strength comes in forms you've been too arrogant to recognize. You accept that your narrow definition of worth has been cheating this pack out of valuable members. You accept that change is necessary. Garrett laughed, but it sounded forced now, uncertain. Deal. Who's your champion? Let's get this over with. Leora turned and gestured. From the edge of the training ground, a figure stepped forward into the circle. Nina. The young Omega had transformed over the past 3 months in ways that went beyond the physical, though those changes were evident too. Training had put lean muscle on her frame, replacing the softness that came from limited activity and a diet barely sufficient for survival. Her movements had changed, no longer the hesitant, apologetic shuffle of someone trying to take up as little space as possible, but purposeful strides with shoulders back and chin lifted. But the real transformation was in her eyes. The fear had been replaced by something harder, sharper. Determination, purpose, the unshakable knowledge of her own worth. The warriors burst into laughter, the sound echoing across the training grounds like mockery given voice. An Omega? Garrett said, disbelief coloring his voice even as he tried to maintain his smirk. You're sending an Omega against me? This is your champion? I'm sending someone who's fought every day of her life just to be seen as a person, Leora said quietly, but her words carried weight that silence couldn't diminish. Someone who's had to be twice as strong to get half the respect you were handed at birth. Someone who has everything to prove and nothing to lose. She met Garrett's eyes, holding his gaze until he looked away. Still think this will be easy? Garrett's expression hardened, the mockery fading as he seemed to realize this wasn't the joke he'd expected. This is a mistake. But if you want her humiliated in front of the whole pack, so be it. Her blood will be on your hands. The match was set for the following day, giving both fighters time to prepare. Word spread through the pack like wildfire. The Sanctuary's Omega would fight Frostpine's strongest warrior. Wolves placed bets, most heavily favoring Garrett with odds so lopsided they were almost insulting. The few who bet on Nina did so more out of hope than belief, or because they wanted to show support for what Leora was trying to build, even if they doubted it would succeed. That night, Leora found Nina in the Sanctuary's training room, practicing forms with fierce concentration. Sweat dripped from her face, her muscles trembling with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. Each movement was precise, controlled, executed with the kind of focus that came from knowing your life might depend on perfection. You don't have to do this, Leora said gently, stepping into the room. I can find another way to prove the point. This burden doesn't have to fall on your shoulders. Nina stopped mid-movement, her breath coming hard and fast. No, this is my fight, my chance to prove that everything they said about me was wrong. She looked at Leora, her eyes blazing with an intensity that reminded Leora of herself standing in that great hall, choosing to sing when silence would have been safer. You showed me it was possible. You stood up when everyone expected you to crumble. Now I need to show them. I need to prove to myself that I'm not what they said I was. Leora understood that need intimately, felt it in her bones like an old ache that never quite faded. Then we make sure you're ready. We make sure you have every advantage skill and strategy can provide. They trained through the night, Leora teaching Nina every trick she'd learned from watching warriors spar over the years, every weakness she'd observed in Garrett's technique during her months of careful observation. She taught her how to read an opponent's weight distribution, how to anticipate attacks from shoulder positioning, how to use an enemy's strength and momentum against them. Nina was smaller, lighter, less powerful in raw physical terms, but she was faster, more flexible, and she had something Garrett lacked, something no amount of muscle could replicate. She was fighting for her right to exist as more than what others decided she should be, and that gave her an edge sharper than any blade. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky a pale blue that promised good weather. The entire pack gathered at the training grounds, forming a dense circle around the combat area. Leora saw Veilor standing with Mira and the Elder Council, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes watchful, alert to any sign of foul play or interference. Garrett entered the circle to cheers and shouts of encouragement, warriors calling his name and predicting swift victory. He wore light armor that showed off his muscular build and carried a practice sword, his confidence evident in every movement, in the way he acknowledged the crowd's adulation with casual waves. Nina entered to scattered applause and more than a few jeers. Someone shouted something crude about Omegas knowing their place. Another voice suggested she surrender now to save herself the pain. She wore no armor, carried only a staff, choosing speed and reach over protection, mobility over defense. Leora caught her eye across the circle and nodded once. "You can do this." Nina nodded back, her jaw set. "I know." The rules were simple and brutal. The match continued until one fighter yielded or was rendered unable to continue. No killing blows, but everything else was permitted. It was the traditional way Frostpine settled serious disputes, and both fighters had agreed to the terms. An elder raised his hand, then dropped it sharply. The match began. Garrett attacked immediately, using his size and strength to try for a quick victory that would humiliate Nina and prove his point. His sword came down in a powerful arc that should have ended the fight in seconds, a blow that would have driven Nina to the ground and left her stunned. But Nina wasn't there. She'd rolled aside at the last possible instant, using her smaller size to slip past his guard, her staff whipping out to strike his knee with precision born of countless hours of practice. Garrett stumbled, more surprised than hurt, his eyes widening at the realization that his opponent wasn't going to make this easy. He recovered quickly, his warrior training kicking in, and began circling with more caution now, reassessing the threat. The crowd went quiet, sensing this wouldn't be the easy victory they'd expected. The fight became a dance, Garrett's raw power and superior reach against Nina's speed and precision. Every time he swung with enough force to break bones, she was somewhere else, flowing like water around his attacks. Every time he thought he had her cornered, had cut off her escape routes, she found an opening he hadn't anticipated. And slowly, methodically, she wore him down with small strikes, targeting joints and pressure points, using technique over strength, skill over size. 5 minutes in, Garrett's breathing had changed, become heavier. 10 minutes in, he was breathing hard, frustration making him sloppy as he abandoned more complex techniques for straightforward power attacks. Nina was tired too, sweat soaked through her shirt, her movements slightly slower, but her eyes remained focused, calculating, watching for the moment when his frustration would create the opening she needed. Garrett charged, abandoning all pretense of technique, for a straightforward tackle meant to use his superior weight to pin her to the ground where his strength would be impossible to overcome. Nina waited until the last possible second, every muscle coiled tight, then dropped and rolled, using his own momentum against him exactly as Leora had taught her. Garrett hit the ground hard, his sword flying from his grip and skittering across the packed earth. Nina was on him instantly, her staff pressed against his throat with just enough pressure to be threatening but not damaging. "Yield," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion, despite the trembling in her limbs. Garrett's face was purple with rage and humiliation, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, Leora thought he might refuse, might turn this into something uglier and more violent, might force Nina to actually hurt him to win. Then Veilor's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "The match is over. Nina wins." Silence fell over the training grounds, absolute and stunned. Wolves stared at the scene before them, their strongest warrior on his back, defeated by an Omega they'd dismissed as worthless. Nina stepped back, breathing hard, and offered her hand to help Garrett up. He stared at it for a long moment, pride and shame warring on his face, before finally taking it and allowing the Omega he'd dismissed and mocked to pull him to his feet. "You're stronger than I thought," he admitted grudgingly, the words clearly costing him. "I was always this strong," Nina said quietly, but her voice carried across the silent grounds. "You just never bothered to look. None of you did." The crowd remained silent as Nina walked back to where Leora stood, her head high despite her exhaustion. Then, From somewhere in the assembled wolves, someone began to clap. Slowly at first, hesitantly, as if uncertain whether this was allowed. Others joined, slowly at first, then building into genuine applause. Not everyone. Some warriors still looked angry, some elders disapproving, unwilling to accept what they'd just witnessed. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to mark a shift in how the pack saw the sanctuary and the wolves it sheltered. Leora pulled Nina into a fierce embrace, pride swelling in her chest. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you," Nina said, her voice thick with emotion. "You showed me I was worth fighting for, that I was worth believing in." That afternoon, Mira approached Leora with a formal request from the council. The sanctuary would be recognized as an official institution within the pack, with Leora as its leader and full authority to train and protect any wolf who sought refuge there. Resources would be allocated, protections guaranteed, and any wolf who interfered with the sanctuary's work would face consequences from the pack leadership. It was victory, tangible and real. But Leora knew it was also just the beginning. Changing minds would take longer than 3 months, longer than 3 years. Some wolves would never accept that strength came in different forms, would cling to their narrow definitions until they died. But others were starting to see, starting to understand, and that was enough to build on. The true test came 2 weeks later, when Valor received word from Ironhold. His presence was required. There were matters of state that couldn't be delayed any longer, decisions that required the Alpha King's direct attention and authority. It was time to return to the seat of his power. Leora stood in their shared quarters, watching him prepare to leave, and felt the old fear creeping back like frost spreading across glass. "What happens to the sanctuary when I'm gone?" Valor looked up sharply from the maps he'd been studying. "When we're gone," he corrected firmly. "You're coming with me, Leora. You're my mate, my queen. Your place is at Ironhold, beside me." "My place is here," Leora said quietly, the words painful but necessary. "These wolves need someone who understands what they're going through, who's lived it. If I leave now, everything we've built could collapse. The pack's acceptance is fragile, conditional. Without me here to maintain it, to fight for it every day, it could all fall apart." "Well, then we'll strengthen it before we go," Valor said, setting down the maps and crossing to her. "We'll establish structures, appoint leaders, make it sustainable without requiring your constant presence." "It's not about structure," Leora argued, her voice rising with frustration and fear. "It's about presence. About showing them every single day that someone cares enough to stay, to fight for them, to refuse to let them be forgotten." Her voice cracked. "I can't abandon them the way I was abandoned. I can't leave them wondering if they mattered, if any of this was real." Valor crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hands in his grip warm and solid. "You're not abandoning anyone. You're expanding your reach, increasing your impact." His pale eyes held hers, intense and earnest. "Think about what you could do as queen, not just for Frostpine, but for every territory under my rule. Every pack that's cast aside their different wolves, their inconvenient ones, their square pegs in round holes. You could create sanctuaries everywhere. You could change the entire North." Leora's breath caught as the vision expanded in her mind. She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't dared to imagine her influence extending beyond Frostpine's borders. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. "But what about here?" she asked, clinging to the immediate concern because it was manageable, concrete. "Who'll lead the sanctuary? Who'll fight for them when the pack tries to undermine the work?" "Who would you trust?" Valor asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. The answer came immediately, obvious and right. "Nina. She's earned it. She understands the mission better than anyone, and she's strong enough to stand up to anyone who tries to undermine it. The pack respects her now after the fight. They'll listen to her." They presented the proposal to Nina that evening, calling her into their quarters for a private conversation. The young Omega's eyes went wide with shock, then filled with tears that she tried unsuccessfully to blink away. "Me? Lead the sanctuary?" "You've already been leading," Leora said gently, reaching out to take Nina's trembling hands. "The younger Omegas look to you for guidance, for protection. The warriors respect you after the match, some reluctantly, but they respect you nonetheless. You have the strength and the heart for this. You understand what these wolves need because you've been one of them. But I'm not ready, Nina protested, fear and doubt creeping into her voice. I'm only 17. I don't know enough, haven't lived enough. What if I make mistakes? What if I fail them? Neither did I when I started, Leora interrupted gently. I was broken and alone and terrified. I had no training for this, no preparation. But I learned. I grew. You will too. And I'll visit regularly, help guide you. Make sure you have everything you need. You won't be alone in this. Nina looked between Leora and Veilor, uncertainty warring with determination on her young face, the weight of responsibility settling visibly on her shoulders. Finally, after a long moment of internal struggle, she nodded. I'll do it. For all of us who've been told we're not enough, that we don't matter. I'll prove them wrong the way you proved them wrong. The transition took another month of intensive preparation. Leora worked tirelessly to prepare Nina for the challenges ahead, to establish systems that would support the sanctuary's work even when Leora wasn't physically present. They created formal protocols for intake, training schedules, resource allocation. Leora met with the council repeatedly to extract promises of protection and resources, to establish consequences for anyone who tried to interfere with the sanctuary's operations. Mira proved to be an unexpected ally in this process. The Beta had taken Leora's earlier words to heart and was actively working to reform Frostpine's treatment of its vulnerable wolves, to change policies and attitudes that had caused so much harm. She pledged the Pack's full support for the sanctuary and promised to act as Nina's advisor and protector. I failed you, Mira said during one of their final meetings, her voice heavy with genuine regret. I saw what was happening and did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that pack hierarchy mattered more than individual suffering. I was wrong. I won't fail Nina. I won't fail any of the wolves who come to the sanctuary seeking safety. On the day before they were scheduled to leave, Leora walked through Frostpine one last time, saying her goodbyes to the territory that had been both her prison and the place of her transformation. She visited her old hut, now abandoned and slowly being reclaimed by the forest, its roof sagging under accumulated snow, its walls weathered and broken. She stood there for a long moment, remembering the loneliness that had soaked into those walls, the cold nights wondering if anyone would notice if she simply disappeared, the endless internal arguments about whether survival was worth the pain of continuing. Then she turned her back on it and walked away, each step feeling lighter than the last. That building didn't define her anymore. It never had, really. It was just a place where she'd learned to survive, to endure, to find strength in herself when the world offered none. The farewell ceremony was held in the Great Hall, the same place where everything had changed that night months ago. But this time, when Leora stood before the assembled pack, she wasn't a broken Omega begging for scraps of dignity or trying to prove she deserved to exist. She was their queen, respected and recognized, leaving on her own terms. Wolves she'd helped stood with her, Nina and the other sanctuary residents, even some who'd initially opposed her work but had come to respect what she'd accomplished. They formed a wall of support, visible proof that change was possible, that the sanctuary's mission was real and valuable. Mira spoke first, her voice formal but carrying genuine emotion. Lady Leora came to us as one we'd cast aside, forgotten, dismissed as worthless. She leaves as one who showed us our blindness, our cruelty, our failure to see strength in unexpected places. Frostpine owes her a debt we can never fully repay. But we can honor her by continuing the work she started, by protecting those she protected, by being better than we were before she forced us to look at ourselves honestly. Then Nina stepped forward, her young voice clear and strong, carrying through the hall with confidence that would have been unimaginable 3 months ago. I was nobody before Leora showed me I was somebody. I was weak until she taught me that weakness was just strength, waiting to be discovered, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. She saved my life without even knowing she was doing it, and I promise, on my honor and my wolf, that I will carry her mission forward. Every wolf who needs sanctuary will find it here. Every wolf who's been told they're worthless will hear a different story. The pack's response was a low howl, spreading through the hall like a wave, acceptance, acknowledgement, respect hard-won and genuinely earned. Leora felt tears burning in her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until she was away from the watching crowd. Valor stood and offered his hand, his expression proud and fierce. Together, they walked through the hall one final time, wolves bowing as they passed, some with genuine respect, others with grudging acknowledgement of what she'd accomplished. Outside, horses and carriages waited, along with an honor guard from Ironhold sent to escort their king and queen home. But before Leora could climb into the carriage, a small figure broke from the crowd that had gathered to watch their departure. A young Omega, barely 13, with wide, frightened eyes, and a desperation that reminded Leora painfully of herself. She ran to Leora and pressed something into her hand, a carved wooden bird, crude but made with obvious care and attention, each feather individually etched. "My grandfather made these," the girl whispered, her voice trembling. "He taught me to carve when I couldn't do anything else right, when everyone said I was useless. I want you to have it so you remember us. So you remember what you did here, what you changed." Leora's fingers closed around the bird, and the tears finally came, hot and unstoppable. She knelt down so she was eye level with the girl, so this young wolf could see she was being truly heard and seen. "What's your name?" "Sarah?" "Sarah, listen to me carefully. You can do everything right, exactly the way you want. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And if they try, if anyone makes you feel small or worthless, you go to Nina at the sanctuary. She'll protect you. She'll help you find your strength. I promise you that." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her own face, then ran back to the crowd where an older woman, probably her mother, waited with an expression of gratitude and hope. Leora stood, clutching the wooden bird like a talisman, and looked at Valor. He was watching her with an expression of fierce pride and something deeper, love, she realized with a jolt of recognition. He loved her, not despite her brokenness, but because of what she'd made of it, because of her refusal to let that brokenness define or limit her. "Ready?" he asked softly. "Yes," Leora said, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready." They climbed into the carriage together, Valor's hand finding hers immediately, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. As the carriage pulled away from Frostpine, Leora looked back one last time through the window. The pack stood assembled, watching her leave. But this time, they weren't watching her go with relief or indifference or barely concealed contempt. They were watching their queen depart, and their faces held respect, gratitude, and the weight of promises they intended to keep. The journey to Ironhold was different this time, transformed by everything that had happened. Leora wasn't running toward an unknown future in fear and desperation, wasn't fleeing from rejection and pain. She was walking into her future with purpose, with proof of what she could accomplish carved into her very soul, with Valor at her side as partner and equal. When the fortress came into view 3 days later, rising from the mountain like something carved by giants, Leora felt a flutter of anxiety, but it was different from before. Not the paralytic fear of inadequacy that had plagued her first arrival, but the sharp awareness of someone about to face a worthy challenge, armed with knowledge of their own capabilities. Kale waited in the courtyard, her expression carefully neutral, as always. The woman had sent correspondence during Leora's time in Frostpine, terse, professional updates about Ironhold's operations that revealed nothing of her thoughts on her king's mate proving herself in the field, earning respect and authority. "Your Majesty," Kale said, bowing deeply to Valor with the practiced deference of someone who'd served him for years. Then, with slightly less depth but still clearly respectful, "My queen." The title, spoken by the woman who'd doubted her most vocally, who'd orchestrated the calling to expose her as a fraud, felt like another small victory worth savoring. "We have much to discuss," Kyle continued, straightening and meeting Leora's eyes with something that might have been approval flickering in their depths. "The Northern Territories have been watching events in Frostpine with great interest. Word of your sanctuary spread faster than wildfire. Several alphas have requested similar institutions be established in their lands, have asked for your guidance and expertise." Leora's eyes widened with genuine surprise. "Several? 7, at last count," Kyle said, and now there was definitely approval in her expression, grudging but real. "It seems your work has inspired others to examine their own treatment of vulnerable wolves, to question practices they'd always taken for granted. They want guidance on implementation, want to understand how to create sanctuaries that actually work, rather than just paying lip service to the idea. Valor's hand found Leora's, squeezing gently, his touch conveying pride and vindication. "I told you," he murmured, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "Your influence extends far beyond Frostpine. You've started something that can't be stopped now." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity that left Leora exhausted but energized. She met with representatives from different territories, sharing what she'd learned through trial and error, helping them understand that sanctuary wasn't about coddling weakness, but about recognizing strength in unexpected forms, about allowing wolves to contribute in ways that matched their actual abilities, rather than forcing them into predetermined roles. She also began navigating the complex politics of Ironhold with new confidence born from success and hard-won respect. The court still tested her, still pushed to find weaknesses and leverage, but she'd learned from Frostpine how to stand her ground without becoming rigid, how to turn challenges into opportunities for dialogue and change, how to find allies in unexpected places. And slowly, grudgingly, the court began to accept her, not just as Valor's mate, the woman he'd chosen for reasons they didn't fully understand, but as a force in her own right, someone with genuine authority and valuable insights. 3 months after their return to Ironhold, Valor called a gathering of all the Northern Alphas, a grand council that happened only once every few years to address matters affecting all territories simultaneously, to make decisions that would shape the direction of wolf society for generations. Leora stood beside him on the raised platform in the vast throne room, facing dozens of alphas and their advisors. She recognized some, Mira representing Frostpine, several who'd requested sanctuaries and visited Ironhold for consultation. Others were strangers, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile, from genuinely interested to deeply skeptical. Valor spoke first, his voice carrying through the great hall with the authority of absolute power tempered by wisdom. "We've gathered to address a systemic failure in how our territories treat wolves who don't fit traditional roles. For too long, for generations, for centuries, we've measured worth by narrow standards: strength in combat, value in breeding, power in dominance. And in doing so, we've cast aside wolves who could have contributed in different ways, whose potential was wasted because we refused to see it, refused to even look for it." He paused, letting his words sink into the assembled alphas, letting them feel the weight of accusation and challenge. "My mate, Queen Leora, experienced this firsthand. She was rejected, dismissed, forgotten by a pack that should have protected her. And yet she possessed something none of us recognized, a strength that comes from survival, from refusing to break even when breaking would have been easier, from finding worth in herself when the world denied it existed." Valor turned to Leora, gesturing for her to speak, publicly giving her authority equal to his own. She'd prepared for this moment, had rehearsed carefully worded speeches with Valor's advisors, but standing before these powerful alphas, feeling the weight of their skepticism and resistance, she abandoned her careful preparation and spoke from the heart, from the truth of her experience. "I'm not going to tell you that all wolves are the same," Leora began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Or that strength doesn't matter, or that we should abandon all standards and structure. But I will tell you that we've been looking at strength wrong. We've confused it with power, with dominance, with the ability to defeat others in combat. And in doing so, we've missed the wolves who are strong enough to survive rejection, to endure isolation, to keep fighting when everyone tells them they're worthless and should just give up." She stepped forward, moving to the edge of the platform, closer to the assembled alphas. "In Frostpine, I created a sanctuary for wolves the pack had discarded like broken tools. In just 3 months, those worthless wolves produced our best healer, whose knowledge of herbs and treatments saved lives that would have been lost. A scout whose tracking skills surpass any of our warriors, who can read signs in the forest others miss entirely. A lore keeper whose recovered songs and knowledge we'd almost lost forever. Wisdom from our ancestors we'd dismissed as irrelevant. And a fighter who defeated our strongest warrior in single combat before the entire pack." Murmurs rippled through the assembled alphas, skepticism mixing with genuine interest. "Imagine," Leora continued, her voice growing stronger as she hit her stride, How much potential we're wasting across all our territories. How many brilliant healers are forced into warrior training and fail because their gifts lie elsewhere? How many talented artists or craftsmen are dismissed because they can't hunt efficiently? How many wolves with unique abilities, with insights and skills we desperately need, are cast aside because they don't fit our predetermined boxes, our narrow definitions of value? She looked directly at an alpha she knew opposed the sanctuary system, a traditional wolf who'd made his skepticism clear in his correspondence. You're afraid this will weaken your packs, create generations of soft wolves who can't defend themselves. I'm telling you it will strengthen them immeasurably. Because right now, you're forcing square wolves into round holes and wondering why they break, why they fail, why they never reach their potential. Give them spaces where their actual shapes fit, where their real talents can emerge, and watch what they can do. Watch how they contribute in ways you never imagined possible. The hall erupted into debate, some alphas agreeing loudly, others objecting just as forcefully, centuries of tradition clashing with the possibility of change. Vialor let it continue for several minutes, letting them process and argue, before raising his hand for silence. "The Crown is issuing a mandate," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade through cloth. "Every territory will establish a sanctuary system within the next year. Implementation details will be worked out individually with Queen Leora's guidance, but the core principle is non-negotiable. We will no longer cast aside wolves simply because they're different, because they don't fit traditional roles, because they challenge our comfortable assumptions about strength and worth." The hostile alpha stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "And if we refuse? You can't force this change on autonomous territories." Valor's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. "Then you'll find yourself explaining to the Crown why you're refusing a direct order issued for the good of all northern wolves. And I think we all know how that conversation ends, what the consequences of open defiance would be." The threat was unmistakable, hanging in the air like a drawn sword. Comply or lose your territory and possibly your life. One by one, the alphas nodded their acceptance. Some genuine, already convinced by Leora's words and the evidence from Frostpine. Some grudging, accepting only because they had no real choice, because defying the Alpha King was suicide. But all understanding they would implement this change whether they believed in it or not. The council continued for 3 more days, working out logistics and timelines, establishing oversight mechanisms and reporting requirements. By the end, Leora had commitments from every northern territory to establish sanctuaries within the year, with regular reporting to Ironhold to ensure they were properly maintained and not just empty gestures meant to satisfy the mandate without embracing its spirit. It was more than she'd dared to hope for when this all began with a single song in Frostpine's Great Hall. That night, she and Valor stood on Ironhold's highest tower, looking out at the territories spreading beneath them like a tapestry of forest and mountain, each one now committed to change that would reshape wolf society. "You've changed the North," Valor said quietly, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. "In less than a year, you've rewritten rules that stood for generations, challenged assumptions that seemed eternal and unquestionable." "We changed it," Leora corrected, leaning into his warmth. "I couldn't have done this without you, without your support and authority, backing every move." "You could have," Valor said with absolute certainty. "It would have been harder, taken longer, cost you more. You would have found a way eventually. That's who you are. Someone who finds ways when everyone else sees only walls. Someone who refuses to accept impossible as a final answer." Leora leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the mate bond humming contentedly between them. "Do you remember what you said to me in Frostpine, that first night when everything changed?" "I said a lot of things that night." "You said I was steel wrapped in skin," Leora recalled, the memory as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. "I didn't believe you then. I thought you were being kind, trying to make me feel better about my weakness. And now?" She thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd accomplished, all the wolves she'd helped find their own strength and value. "Now I know you were right. I was always steel. I just needed to be tempered by fire first, needed to be tested and proven before I could recognize it in myself." Valor pulled her closer, his wolf rumbling contentedly in recognition of its mate, in satisfaction at her growing strength and confidence. The broken Omega who became a queen. It's a story they'll tell for generations, a legend that will inspire others. Leora smiled, but she shook her head gently. I was never broken. I was just told I was, so many times and so consistently that I started to believe it, started to see myself through their eyes instead of my own. She looked up at him, meeting his pale gaze. The real story isn't about being broken and fixed. It's about refusing to let others define your worth. About finding your own strength, even when the world insists you're weak. About knowing your value when everyone around you denies it exists. That's a better story, Veilor agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. And a truer one. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one across the darkening sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Somewhere in those territories below, wolves who'd been cast aside were finding sanctuary. Young Omegas like Nina were learning they could be strong in their own ways. Outcasts were discovering they had value beyond what the pack had told them. And it had all started with one rejected wolf who'd sung a song when she had nothing left to lose, when silence would have been safer but less honest. 6 months later, on a morning when spring had fully claimed the north and new life was emerging everywhere, Leora received a letter from Nina. Frostpine's sanctuary had expanded to house 20 wolves and was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. More importantly, the pack's attitudes were shifting, slowly, grudgingly, but genuinely and measurably. Wolves who'd once scorned the sanctuary were now recommending it to family members who didn't fit traditional roles, were seeing value where before they'd seen only failure. The letter included a sketch. Nina had discovered a talent for drawing during her time at the sanctuary and had illustrated the building, showing wolves training, learning, growing, contributing. At the bottom, in careful script, she'd written, "We're changing the world, one wolf at a time. Thank you for showing us it was possible. Thank you for refusing to disappear." Leora hung the sketch in her chambers, where she'd see it every morning when she woke, a reminder of what could be built from rejection and pain. She also kept the wooden bird Sarah had given her, and the silver pendant Veilor had offered that first night, the one that symbolized her choice to claim her own destiny rather than accepting the one others had decided for her. These were her treasures, were not gold or jewels or the elaborate trappings of queenship that filled Ironhold's vaults, but reminders of where she'd been and how far she'd come, of the wolves she'd saved and the ones who'd saved her in return. The transformation of the Northern Territories continued through that year and into the next, sometimes smooth, often turbulent and contested. There were setbacks, alphas who implemented sanctuaries in name only, creating empty buildings without real support or resources. Wolves who resented the changes and actively worked to undermine them. Challenges to Liora's authority from those who still couldn't accept that an Omega could hold real power. But there were victories too, moments that made every struggle worthwhile. A young male with a gift for strategy who'd been dismissed as too weak for combat became an advisor whose tactics saved a territory from invasion by a rival pack. A female Omega who couldn't shift properly discovered she had an extraordinary ability to communicate with horses, revolutionizing how messages were carried between territories and cutting travel time in half. A wolf-born deaf learned to read lips and expressions so well he became an invaluable negotiator, able to catch lies and deceptions others missed entirely, his supposed weakness becoming his greatest strength. Story after story reached Leora. Wolves who'd been nothing in their pack's eyes becoming something valuable, contributing in ways no one had imagined possible, simply because someone finally bothered to look beyond the surface and see what was actually there. And through it all, the mate bond between Leora and Veilor deepened, strengthened, became something neither had known was possible. They balanced each other perfectly, his authority and her empathy, his strategic mind and her intimate understanding of suffering, his power to command and her power to inspire genuine loyalty rather than fear-based obedience. Together, they were reshaping what it meant to lead, what it meant to be strong, what it meant to build a society worth living in. A year to the day after Leora had first sung in Frostpine's Great Hall, Veilor declared a celebration. Representatives from every territory gathered at Ironhold for a festival honoring the sanctuary system's success, celebrating the changes that had transformed the North in ways both visible and subtle. The Great Hall was transformed for the occasion, filled with wolves from all walks of life, powerful alphas standing beside former outcasts they'd learned to respect. Warriors talking with healers as equals. Traditional wolves mixing with those who'd found new paths through the sanctuary system. Leora stood at the center of it all, no longer the frightened, broken Omega who'd arrived in this fortress, terrified of her own inadequacy, certain she'd fail and prove every cruel word ever said about her. She was Queen Leora Draven now, respected and recognized across the Northern Territories as someone who'd changed their world fundamentally and irrevocably. But more importantly, she was herself, strong in her own way, valuable on her own terms, exactly who she'd always been, finally seen clearly and honestly. Valor found her in the crowd and pulled her aside, leading her to a quieter corner away from the celebration's noise. "I have something for you," he said, his eyes warm with affection and pride. He handed her a small wooden box, its surface carved with intricate patterns. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a pendant, a wolf's head like the one he'd given her before they'd left Frostpine. But this one had another wolf beside it, their heads touching gently, their forms intertwined in a way that suggested completeness and unity. "Two wolves," Valor said quietly, taking the pendant from its box. "Two halves of one soul. Broken pieces that fit together perfectly, that make each other stronger and more complete." Leora's vision blurred with tears of joy and gratitude. "It's beautiful." "It's us," Valor said simply. He took the pendant and fastened it around her neck with gentle fingers, the metal warm from his touch settling against her skin. "A reminder that we're stronger together than we ever were apart, that our weaknesses become strengths when we support each other." The celebration continued around them, but in that moment, they were alone. Two souls who'd found each other across impossible distances, who'd recognized in each other the strength the world had tried to deny, who'd built something beautiful from rejection and pain. From across the hall, Nina caught Leora's eye and raised her glass in a silent toast, her young face glowing with confidence and purpose. Other sanctuary leaders joined her, representatives from territories across the north, wolves who'd learned to see value where others saw only weakness, who were building communities of acceptance and growth. Leora raised her own glass in return, acknowledging them, honoring them, celebrating what they'd built together. They were changing the world, one wolf at a time, one sanctuary at a time, one opened mind at a time. And it had all started with a broken voice singing a song of longing into the darkness, calling out to a soul who'd been waiting to hear it, who'd been searching for exactly that imperfect, honest sound. Leora thought about that moment often in the years that followed, standing in Frostpine's great hall, terrified and alone, opening her mouth to sing when she had every reason to stay silent, when silence would have been safer and easier and less painful. That single act of defiance, of refusing to disappear quietly into the margins, had changed everything for her and for countless others. She'd been called worthless, useless, broken beyond any hope of repair. But she'd proven them wrong, not by becoming what they wanted, not by fixing herself to match their narrow definitions, but by refusing to be anything other than exactly who she was, broken voice and all, damaged wolf and all, Omega who didn't fit their expectations and all. And in doing so, and standing firm in her own truth, she'd shown countless other wolves that they could do the same, that different wasn't wrong, that broken was just another word for unique, for unexpected, for strong in ways the world hadn't learned to measure yet. The broken Omega who became a queen, not through fixing what was broken, not through becoming what they wanted, but through recognizing that broken was just another word for different, for unexpected, for strong in ways the world hadn't learned to measure yet, for valuable in ways tradition hadn't thought to look for. Leora stood beside her mate in the halls of Ironhold, wearing the crown she'd earned through survival and defiance and an unwavering refusal to let others define her worth, surrounded by wolves she'd inspired and helped and saved simply by refusing to accept their assessment of her value. She was home. Not in a place, though Ironhold had become that too, but in herself, in the knowledge of her own worth that no one could take from her again. And that, she understood now with perfect clarity, had always been the point. The journey hadn't been about proving them wrong, though that had been satisfying. It had been about proving herself right, about discovering and claiming the strength that had been inside her all along, waiting for her to recognize it, to nurture it, to let it shine. She was steel wrapped in skin, exactly as Valor had said. She always had been. She just needed to believe it herself.